economic relationship between Canada and the United States. Pursuant to the motion adopted by the House on February 16th, 2021, the special committee is meeting to discuss the economic relationship between Canada and the United States. Today, we're continuing our examination of Buy America procurement policies. So I would like to now take the opportunity to wish a very warm welcome to our witnesses from the Department of Foreign Affairs, Trade and Development. We have with us today the Honorable Marc Garneau, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Steve Verhoule, Assistant Deputy Minister, Trade Policy and Negotiations, and Chief Trade Negotiator of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement. And we also have with us today Mr. Michael Grant, Assistant Deputy Minister of the Americas. So thank you very much, Minister, for taking the time. And you know, I know you're very busy like we all are, but thank you very much for taking the time. I understand you have some opening comments, so you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be in front of your committee. It's my first time in front of any committee as Foreign Minister, and I'm delighted to be here with Steve Verhoule and Michael Grant from our ministry. Canada and the United States have a unique and incomparable relationship. We enjoy the world's largest trading relationship and the longest undefended border. We are strong allies on the world stage and work together to protect our natural environment in our two countries. But we are also guided by the objective of reducing emissions globally. No two nations depend more on each other for their mutual prosperity and success. About $2.7 billion worth of goods and services cross our shared border every day. Roughly 3/4 of Canada's exports go to the United States. In February, mere weeks after his inauguration, President Biden chose to renew with tradition and have his first meeting with a world leader to be with Prime Minister Trudeau. They talked about the importance of a shared vision for clean, sustainable growth that creates opportunities and strengthens the middle class on both sides of the border. Following this meeting, they announced the roadmap for a renewed U.S.-Canada partnership to revitalize and expand our historic relationship. The roadmap is a blueprint to expand our cooperation in many critical areas, including our response to the COVID-19 pandemic and building cleaner, fairer, and more inclusive economies for everyone. Following this meeting, I have talked to Secretary Blinken to pursue the work undertaken by our two leaders, and we agreed to work together mutually with like-minded partners to promote our fundamental values around the world, like democracy and human rights, including the challenges posed by China and the rise of authoritarianism. This includes the arbitrary detention of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. The U.S. assures us of their unequivocal and unwavering support in calling for their release. Secretary Blinken and I have also discussed the importance of working together to build back in an inclusive way from COVID, as well as cooperating on migration issues. Nous nous sommes également entendus à refuser le protectionnisme.
We also agreed to avoid useless protectionism. We all recognize that an economic recovery in the U.S. and Canada will be faster, stronger, and better if we work together. It is for this reason that President Biden and Prime Minister Trudeau adopted a new strategy to solidify the resilience of our supply chains that are very critical for the prosperity of both of our countries and which remains essential in our response to the pandemic. The network of businesses and workers produce goods together, and we want those goods to be used here and elsewhere in the world. Concretely, most U.S. imports from Canada already have U.S. products as part of them, and it is understood that it's essential to avoid the consequences of ill-thought-out protectionism. Canada is a reliable and stable partner for the U.S., and it is also its closest ally. We work together to make sure that our mutual prosperity and our national security are supported by a solid and resistant supply chain. We know very well that Buy America policies negatively affect our cross-border trade, and they also have a negative impact on our American interests. And this is why Prime Minister Trudeau and Vice President Harris spoke on this. And last week, Deputy Prime Minister Freeland and Vice President Harris discussed the importance of free trade, especially in the context of Buy America provisions. Mr. Chair, both of our countries recognize the essential role of natural resources in our trade relations. Canada is the first energy supplier to the U.S., and this includes oil, natural gas, hydroelectricity, and uranium. It is essential that we work together to make sure that we offer reliable and sustainable energy for North America and the entire world.
Exports. It supports the economy, jobs, and competitiveness on both sides of the border. It provides energy, security, and resiliency to North America, and supporting Line 5's continued operation remains a top priority now and in the future through Enbridge's tunnel project. We work tirelessly through Canada's diplomatic network in the U.S. to promote and strengthen the energy relationship. Our shared desire to ensure greater energy security on the continent is coupled with our shared commitment to create jobs in a clean, sustainable economy of the future that both protects our natural environment and addresses the existential threat of climate change while creating opportunities in the energy sector of the future. We agreed with the U.S. administration to take a coordinated approach to accelerating progress towards sustainable, resilient, and clean energy infrastructure, including encouraging the development of cross-border clean electricity transmission. We have also agreed to align policies to achieve a zero-emissions vehicle future and to create the necessary supply chains to make Canada and the U.S. global leaders in battery development and production, so every citizen can participate in the transition to cleaner energies as well as renewable energy storage. Under the new roadmap, we will also launch a high-level climate ministerial to increase our climate ambitions consistent with the Paris Agreement and net zero objectives while holding polluters accountable. Beyond economic recovery and energy security, Canada and the U.S. also collaborate closely on defense, both at home and abroad, notably through multilateral organizations. À court et moyen terme, nous allons élargir.
In the short and medium term, we will expand our efforts in defending the Arctic area as well, and focusing on NORAD and expanding dialogue with the U.S. and Canada on the Arctic. Mr. Chair, we are currently experiencing a very important and exciting moment in our relationship with the United States. Over the next years, Canada will have many opportunities to work with the Biden administration, and we are very well positioned to seize those opportunities. Thank you, and I will be happy to answer your questions.
Thank you very much, Minister. We will now start our first round of questions. We'll start with Mr. Lewis for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Honourable Minister. Certainly appreciate you coming out here to answer questions of ours. Minister, at a Manufacturing Canada conference in May of 2014, which is as relevant today as it was then, Robert Hatton, a former chairman of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters Board of Directors, suggested to get around the challenges to competing in the U.S. economy, Canadian manufacturers should simply buy an American company. And I quote, "Business as usual is no longer an option, and we have to figure out other ways to continue to participate in the largest economy in the world. Let's buy America. Let's invest in America." Of course, what Mr. Hatton doesn't say is that this would result in a potentially catastrophic loss of well-paying manufacturing jobs in Canada. Minister, to stem further hemorrhaging of contracts and jobs in Canada due to the year-long closure of the Canada-US border, what is the Canadian government doing to ensure that manufacturers can thrive in Canada and jobs in Canada are protected from President Biden's latest tightening of the Buy America provisions?
Well, thank you very much for the question. And of course, you quoted somebody back in 2014 talking about manufacturing and encouraging Canadian companies to buy American companies. That is something to some extent that has happened, as it has the other way as well. We do both as countries invest in each other. But since that time, of course, we renegotiated very successfully the NAFTA 2 agreement, the CUSMA agreement, and I believe that Canada came out of that with a very good free trade agreement with the United States that was modernized and that defended all of the important priorities that we had as a country. So I think the situation is such that trade between our two countries, and I did point out that goods and services we're now talking about over $2 billion a day, is flowing between the two countries, obviously slowed down somewhat by COVID-19, but that because we took a Team Canada approach in making sure that our neighbors to the south were aware of the strongly integrated supply chains that exist between our two countries. As a result of that approach, I think we were able to come out with a very good deal for Canada and for Canadian manufacturers. And we will be cognizant of that as we go forward.
Thank you, Minister. I certainly appreciate that. I was very happy that you spoke about the integrated approach. So, Minister, another concern I have about the Buy America or Buy American provisions is its impact on the Canada-US supply chains that are highly integrated, as you just suggested, sir. Right here in my backyard in Essex is the Windsor Assembly Plant, the Chrysler Assembly Plant. We cannot get chips for our vehicles. Therefore, the plant is shut down for 1 month. So I really suggest that integration is not happening at the greatest level it perhaps could. And Minister, parts for a vehicle go back and forth across the busiest international border 7 times, up to 7 times before a car is manufactured. And then that same vehicle or truck vehicle is sent back to the States and or Mexico in some cases. Minister, is Canada negotiating with their US counterparts to ensure that the integrated supply chain with respect to manufacturing in Canada, and particularly the automotive sector, is protected?
Yes, and I'm glad that you brought up the example of the automotive sector because it's probably the most important illustration of how tightly integrated our supply chains are. As you point out, products go back and forth across the border before they end up in a finished car. And the automobile sector has been very well protected in the renegotiated Canada, US, Mexico trade agreement and will continue to be protected as we go forward. And the United States recognizes very clearly that that is a strong example of where there can be unintended consequences with protectionist policies. And we're going to make sure that the United States continues to understand that. And we're confident that they will as we go forward, and particularly as we transition from internal combustion engine cars to electric cars. So we're confident that that message will continue to be carried to our neighbors to the south.
Thank you, Minister. Mr. Chair, how much time left, sir?
1 minute.
Thank you so much. So interestingly enough, Minister, I am the chair of the Conservative Auto Caucus. And yesterday I had 8 or 9 stakeholders on there from all aspects of auto. And yes, there's a lot of talk of electric, and I think that's fantastic. But you know, sales across Canada are down 20%, and that's due because we cannot get commerce back and forth across the border. We can't get people back and forth across the border. What specifically, Minister, and or have you had any conversations with your counterparts in the United States to ensure that manufacturers, advanced manufacturers in the auto sector, can get people across the border to do their jobs?
I'm very glad you brought that up. And yes, we are specifically talking about different groups that would be potentially considered to be essential workers that have the need to cross the border for specific reasons. They could be technicians in the automobile industry. And we are currently looking at that to see if we can refine our essential workers list as we move forward.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Lewis. We'll now go to Mr. McKay for 6 minutes, please. Mr. McKay, you're muted. You're muted.
I don't know how many times I've done that, but I'm sure I'm going to do it a few more times. Minister, it's good to see you, even if it is see you virtually again. January 25th, President Biden issued an executive order on ensuring the future is made in all of America by all of America's workers. Not a very subtle executive order, may I say. Seems to me that was a very political executive order. One from this side of the border, one thinks that maybe treaties and laws and various agreements, including NAFTA, NAFTA 2.0 are more casual suggestions than actual agreements that are binding on both parties. So my first question is, what is your political strategy with respect to getting the most favorable treatment under that executive order? Because everything in Washington seems to be political, and you can operate at an executive level, but not necessarily at a political level. So I'm interested in your strategy with respect to that. And the second question I have is with respect to your seeking exemptions from the arbitrary orders that many American officials might well make with respect to Canadian products. And I could give you, Mr. Lewis can give you examples, and I can certainly give examples as well. But I'd be interested in A, your political strategy, and B, how is it that you're going to ameliorate the Section 4 exemptions?
Well, thank you very much for the question. Let me start by differentiating between Buy American and Buy America, which was brought up. Buy American were exempted from because of World Trade Organization government procurement regulations. On the Buy America, however, as I mentioned in my opening remarks, it was pretty much the first subject that the Prime Minister brought up with President Biden when he met him on the 23rd of February. At the same time, the Prime Minister has also spoken to the Vice President, as I mentioned, and our Minister of Finance has spoken as well with Vice President Harris about the unintended consequences that could happen as a result of Buy America policies. Unintended in the sense that products that we sell to the United States, as you know, on average have 21% already of American content in them. And if those products are blocked from being sold in the United States, then effectively the United States is cutting off its nose to spite its face because of that highly integrated nature. That is the message that we carry across to the United States. I believe that we did this very successfully with a great deal of effort in the Team Canada approach that we used for about 2 years when CUSMA was being renegotiated. And we will use a similar approach to remind our American neighbors of the importance of maintaining those supply chains and those exports open to Canada, because it is not only in Canada's interest, but it's also in the interest of Americans. We were successful with CUSMA, and we intend to be successful with Buy America.
We've been friends long enough to know that I don't mind interrupting my friends. But that is a response on an executive level. You to your Secretary of State, the Prime Minister to the President, but as we know, that everything in Washington is political. And so what I'm interested in knowing is, how do you anticipate penetrating Congress, getting to both Republicans and Democrats in Congress and in the Senate? Because that's where that's the people that have skin in the game. There's a number of people who are successful politically because of the anticipation that this kind of a Buy America order would be issued forthwith. So I'd be interested in knowing your political strategy.
So when I talk about the Team Canada approach, we obviously had people like Chrystia Freeland and Steve Verhoeven who were negotiating on our behalf for the the new NAFTA treaty. But at the same time, and I was involved, along with many other government ministers and MPs, in speaking directly to American lawmakers, to American governors, and pointing out to them that, hey, you may not know this, but we are your chief export destination. And we are, in many cases, the country from which you import the most. And there are this many jobs that are involved in your state because of that. That's the kind of hard information that we shared with our American colleagues to point out exactly what the implications of trade between the two countries were. And we believe that we met with some success on that because we think we ended up with a good treaty. And that's the approach we will continue to take as we move forward. And some of the Buy America legislation, which still has to go through Congress, is implemented.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McKay. We will now go to Monsieur Savard Tremblay. Vous avez 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 6 minutes. Hello, greetings to my colleagues, and I thank all the witnesses who are here today. Minister, the 4th of March 2021, the Department of Trade published the third administrative review of orders on anti-dumping around softwood lumber, among other things. Now, tariffs have already been brought down since the last review. What do you think we can expect this time in terms of revised tariffs? Thank you for the question. As you said, the tariffs were reduced, but the work is not over. Canada's position, and the one that we've adopted from the outset, it's been decades now, is that it's unfair and unwarranted that the U.S. impose tariffs on Canadian lumber. It's our position that we continue to defend very strongly. We defend the interests of the Canadian industry. And as you mentioned, under Chapter 19 of NAFTA, we have fought for these rights, and as well under the WTO's rules. And Canada continues to believe that it's in the best interest of both countries to come to an agreement, and we remain ready and willing to come up with an agreement that is mutually acceptable. Lumber was mentioned, and this was a topic that was brought up by both countries, and it was addressed with the administration. As you just reiterated, well, my next question was that the government had announced its intention to negotiate a new agreement on lumber. Is it still on the table? You just confirmed that, but what were the discussions on that? Well, unfortunately, those discussions take some time because some people are very set on their position. But it's not the first time we're doing this. If I'm not mistaken, I think this is the 4th or 5th time that we're having this dispute between our countries. We won the first 4 times, and we certainly intend to use the same arguments this time. And we're encouraged by the fact that currently we have significant allies in the U.S., and that's because the construction industry is in full expansion, and they need a lot of lumber from Canada. So we're going to keep bringing this up with our American colleagues and using the same arguments, because these are the arguments that proved their merit the 4 past times. Yes, well, we know that in general, when there's a verdict that comes out, it's in the direction of Canada and not the U.S. in this type of dispute. But during the period in which the tariffs are in effect, it's very difficult for the industries. They are sometimes losing out on a lot of jobs. They're on the verge of bankruptcy. And so that's where there's a gap. It's that period where there's legal proceedings. So why not use a CUSMA to go forward with dealing with this dispute? Well, as I mentioned, we talked about Chapter 19, rather Chapter 10 of CUSMA. It takes some time for these negotiations to unfold. If you look at the last 4 times, it was not a fast process. It does put our industry in a difficult position, but we're there to support them, as we said. But we have to wait for this all to take its course. And currently, it's undergoing the process and it takes time. We're all looking forward to it being dealt with, but we have to be patient. I'd also like to ask you, there was an important decision in August of 2020 at the WTO. How did that decision change Canada's approach? It was seen as a precedent now. So how did that change Canada's approach vis-a-vis the Americans regarding the tariffs on lumber from Quebec headed for the U.S.? Well, I'm not a lawyer, and so I don't want to predict what that will involve. Certainly, we'll have to deal with that, but I can't tell you how it will end. I think we have to wait for the World Trade Organization to make their final decision. But for the time being, we'll have to keep an eye on what happens. How much time do I have left, Mr. Chair? You have 1 minute left. 1 minute, great. Well, in this case, I'd like to ask you something about the same topic. Within the same question, the new administration does not seem to be particularly open to improving the dispute resolution process. We've seen some signals on that. For a few months now, the new administration has been in place, and we thought for a long time, we thought wrongly that protectionism was a Trump invention, whereas that's not the case at all. It's a very ingrained culture in the U.S. and in their trade. What things were done? What has Canada done when it comes to the appeal process with the WTO? Have you received any information from American officials indicating that they're going to try to move things forward? Has there been a change in position since the change in administration? Well, I can't give you a specific answer to that. As you know, the new administration has only been in place for 3 months. I could refer to my colleague, Steve Verul, who might have some information on that. But I'd also mention at the same time that we're very much at the beginning of our relationship with this new administration. So it might be premature to say how they're going to approach the lumber question. But I'll turn to Steve if he'd like to add some comments.
Time is really over the limit. Maybe Mr. Verhul can add his comments when Mr. Savard-Tremblay has another round. We'll now go to welcome, Mr. Massey. We'll go to you now for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Minister, for being here. I want to first start by thanking you again for your quick and decisive action on hazardous material trucks that were going to cross the Ambassador Bridge during this past Christmas holiday season. Your intervention was significant with Government Whitmer there to block these dangerous trucks from crossing over our Great Lakes system, and I thank you again for that. With that, I do want to ask you about another issue with the FAA in our region here, and that's the NAV Canada study to close the Windsor Airport. I have presented your government with a bill, Bill 278, a private member's bill that would give the government the power to stop the study from happening. Have you had a chance to review this right now? Because why would we want to get into a dispute with the FAA of planes and an airport tower being closed, having to share space, especially since our space is shared with the U.S. military and the private aircrafts and the commercial aircrafts?
Well, thank you very much, thank you very much, Mr. Massey, first of all, for your opening comment, and I want to thank you for bringing it to my attention, the transportation over the bridges of dangerous goods. So I think that was a good example of a team effort between two parties and also just two individuals in the government of Canada. So I appreciate that very much. On the question of and I know that you are very concerned, as are a number of local government officials with respect to the Windsor Airport. As I have explained to you in the past, at the moment, the organization called NAVCAN, which is responsible for air control in our country, decided some time ago to reevaluate the service needs of different airports across the country. As far as I know, and I'm no longer a transport, but as far as I know, they have not made any final decisions. But they are responsible, and they are an arm's length organization, and we have to allow them to do their work. And hopefully they will take into account all of the factors that you have brought up and others such as the Mayor of Windsor have brought up.
What has changed, and I'll leave it at that, but what has changed is that the NAV Canada has changed their process. And second to that, I have presented a bill that will actually provide the government the remedy right away, and I hope you have a chance to look at that. I want to quickly move to our auto sector if we can, because semiconductor computer chips are in shortage in North America, in particular in Canada and Windsor here. Our assembly plant is down again. And one of the things I'd like to know, though, is because we're dependent mostly upon China supply chains for this, have you talked with any American manufacturers or your colleagues politically to look at a domestic solution? These semiconductor chips are like the vaccines for the automobile industry. We cannot produce them without them. And we have no supply capacity for ourselves. So have you had any discussions, or will you follow up with discussions to produce domestic manufacturing for North America for semiconductor chips?
Well, thank you very much for your question. And you raise an important point and in a broader context, if I can talk about other critical materials, and let me talk about critical minerals as an example, that will be very, very important in the transition towards electric vehicles, and that are also used in a lot of electronic products. And those are certainly considerations that I know that both Canada and the Biden administration are looking at very carefully, because as you point out, they're critical elements in the supply chain. And one of the things that we're doing as we move forward is to ensure in both countries that for industries that we are strongly supportive of, that we look at all of the different methods that are available to us to ensure that we have that availability with respect to certain critical components. And I know that the United States is looking at semiconductors, or I beg your pardon, integrated circuits, but I know that Canada also has the potential to be extremely helpful in the area of critical minerals, because we're rich in that area. So we're looking at a kind of a North American self-sufficiency with respect to certain critical components.
Yeah, and I would suggest that batteries shouldn't be alone, and semiconductor chips should be part of that, because we are dependent upon that entire infrastructure. I want to move quickly to a proposal by the Wilson Center to have a border task force to deal with health-related issues of COVID-19 and building back our two countries. Is this being considered by the government right now? Similar to the issues over COVID, is that we have the Canadian Association for Mold Makers who cannot get workers across the border properly. Your order in council that you were part of didn't accommodate for those types of employees, and we also have personal families that can't get reunited. Could you make a commitment today to actually having a border task force created, as many businesses, including the Association for Canadian Business Council, have advocated for? Because there's so many issues under that, and it's something that's going to take ongoing operations. Is that something the government is considering?
So what I will say, because I sit on the COVID committee, is that we are constantly evaluating border policy. And it's probably fair to say that the number one driver is the health and safety of Canadians in making any decisions. Having said that, the situation is gradually changing, and we are very, very sensitive to the need to recover our economies. And we are looking at the process of fine-tuning so that we, in some cases, will examine whether certain classes of workers need to have access across the border that aren't on the original list of essential workers. Those are the kinds of things that we're looking at as we move forward, and also improve our processes with respect to getting people checked before they cross the border, getting people checked after they cross the border, refining our quarantine regulations. Those are all things that are dynamically being examined at the moment by all the relevant people. And we are talking to the stakeholders, and they're certainly talking to us, especially from industry and also from the United States, where some groups want to reopen the border more quickly, but we have to always bear in mind that the number one consideration is the health and safety of Canadians, and they have to.
No doubt. There's no doubt, but I guess I'm looking for is a formal task force commitment that we used to have before with the Manley Ridge Accord and others, where we actually actively worked on untangling border issues on a regular basis with not just the government, but with the private sector, the public sector, and so forth.
Thank you. Did you want to answer that really quickly, Minister?
Well, as I say, the COVID committee, its tentacles reach out to those stakeholders, so we are talking to them.
Thank you, Mr. Massé. We will now begin our second round with Ms. Alislev for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Minister, you stated that Canada's approach to the Made in America executive order is to educate all aspects of the political and industry sectors in the US on Canada's integrated approach to make sure that they're aware of any unintended consequences. Speaking candidly, Minister, President Biden is not new at this, and it could be viewed as naive for us to think that President Biden and our US neighbors haven't made themselves aware of all of the consequences and have decided this course of action anyway. And Canada's current approach hasn't been working. They've canceled Keystone XL. We've lost auto jobs. We are not making progress on softwood lumber, and the steel and aluminum tariffs that were imposed saw a great loss of steel and US manufacturing jobs that went to the US. So what is Canada's plan B? Minister, how are you changing your approach to ensure that Canada achieves a different result?
Well, thank you very much for that question. You will understand that I will take exception to the way you presented some of those statistics. I disagree with the way you painted that picture of how things are going between our two countries, because I think things are going very well between our two countries, notwithstanding that we are going through a pandemic. I would say that we were extremely successful in renegotiating NAFTA, and I believe very strongly that we'll be successful in making the point clearly to our American neighbors that Buy America is something that has to be looked at very carefully because it can have unintended consequences, and that we should stay very close together in terms of following it to make sure that it doesn't have those unintended consequences. And I'm confident that and remember again, we're doing $2.7 billion on a daily basis of trade between our two countries. This is not a small exchange between two countries. This is gigantic, and it involves all 50 states, and it is something that requires us to do our work as Team Canada across those 50 states. Minister, and that's what we're doing.
And Minister, do you know what amount of percentage of that trade every day will be at risk because of these new Made in America provisions?
Well, I'm confident that our trade is going to continue to be strong between our two countries. I guess time will tell, but we continue with our approach of advocacy with respect to our relationship with the United States. It worked very well.
So you don't feel that Canada needs a different approach. We just continue on the current approach, and we will be able to mitigate the messaging that the Americans are looking to protect and repatriate a significant amount of manufacturing jobs in steel and iron and manufactured goods to the U.S.
So many American, very many American lawmakers, governors realize just how important that mutual trade is because of our integrated supply chains. And we will continue to advocate amongst those that may not be as aware of it, and it has worked very well with the previous administration and renegotiating CUSMA, and we will continue in that way.
Thank you, Minister. And so with respect to the border, I recognize now is not the time to open the border, but as you mentioned, we are making progress and the Americans are as well. Canadians need to be able to plan, from small business owners to large corporations to just individuals. Can you tell us when you will be able to provide the conditions under which we can reopen the border? And speak, if you could, specifically to what vaccination might have as an impact on that.
So we evaluate that on a continuous basis. And as you know, we renew our orders in council and we fine tune them as we move forward. I don't think anybody 2 months ago, when the situation was moving downwards from the second wave, could have anticipated the third wave. I don't think that anybody could have.
No, Minister, and I'm not looking for a time in terms of when, but rather the conditions. What's the plan? How do we know when those conditions, what those conditions look like, so that we'll be able to open?
And those conditions depend on the state of the situation between the two countries. And that's what we have to continuously bear in mind as we revise our orders and councils, always, as I say, with the priority being on health and safety. So it's a movable target that we keep adjusting on a monthly basis.
Thank you, Ms. Aalslav. We'll go now to Ms. Romanato for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre, d'être ici avec nous.
Thank you, Minister, for being with us here today. It's not easy to follow after several MPs.
With respect to the border, this is something obviously we are both from the Montreal area, being 45 minutes away from the Bernard-Lacolle border. I hear both sides. You know, we don't want to open the border, or we do want to open the border, or at least let people go in, and especially those that have property on the other side of the border. You mentioned that, you know, it's a moving, revolving issue, and that month by month we're looking at that. But is there a possibility, given the vaccination rates ramping up both in the United States and in Canada, that we will see the border open before the end of summer?
Well, I don't know if my crystal ball is any better than yours, colleague. I would say that certainly the fact that more and more Canadians and Americans are being vaccinated, it certainly moves us in the right direction. At the same time, as anybody can notice, if they check the current situation, there's concern about the third wave, and there has even been some discussion in some quarters about a potential fourth wave. So we're not out of the woods, and we must always bear in mind that health is of Canadians and their safety is paramount. And I fully understand the frustration that this is causing to a lot of people. You've named some examples of people who are directly affected, and I hear for example from Brian Higgins, who is an American congressman who represents the northern states, and they would like to reopen the border more to have that greater opening. So we're hearing from our stakeholders and of course from industry as well. We have to look at all of the information that we have and make the right decision for Canadians. And I, you know, like everybody, I hope that things will get better and we'll be able to loosen things up. But I would not want to be the one to make a prediction right now about exactly when we're going to be able to open that border like it used to be.
Thank you, Minister. And I want to just shift to now one of the probably most important relationships that we have with the United States is that of NORAD. I know that you're very aware of our relationship with NORAD, and having just celebrated 70, the relationship, and we're hearing talks about in Canada about closing NORAD of the North, as we call it in North Bay. Can you elaborate to the committee that may not be as familiar with our relationship with the United States with respect to NORAD, and just how important it is? You mentioned the Arctic, you mentioned you know, our northern passage. If you could could elaborate a little bit for the committee that importance and that continued relationship.
Well, thank you very much. And you know, when we speak about the priorities for our American neighbors, I've spoken about economic priorities in terms of trade between the two countries, but security is also paramount for them. And we have strong alliances with the United States, first in NATO with many other countries, but also with NORAD, which is unique between Canada and the United States. It's the bilateral arrangement that we've had for many decades for the protection of North American territory, and it involves a presence in the Arctic. NORAD is in need of modernization, and we have specifically identified this as an area on the roadmap that we will be discussing with our U.S. neighbors with respect to modernization. And it's also true to point out, as you alluded to, that the Arctic is changing at the moment, primarily because of climate change. And this has huge implications with respect to many things, including increased traffic across the north. And so a greater awareness and modernization of the capabilities that we have within NORAD is something that both Canada and the United States are going to be discussing and implementing.
Thank you. I know I only have about 10 seconds. Thank you very much, Minister.
Thank you, Ms. Romanato. We will now go to Monsieur Savard-Tremblay. Vous avez 2,5 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 2.5 minutes. Thank you. Well, we were interrupted, unfortunately, earlier. I asked Mr. Garneau a question, and he referred to Mr. Verrill, so I'd like to continue with him. Based on the initial discussions with this new administration, do we foresee that something has changed around dispute resolution?
Point, Minister Garneau is exactly correct. The U.S. has not yet formulated their positions on how they want to deal with the issues of dispute settlement at the WTO. The big difference we see is that they are open to a dialogue. They do and are prepared to talk about it. They have made it clear that they have ongoing concerns that they would like to see addressed with respect to the dispute settlement process. But at least we have the opportunity to start to talk about it and see if we can find some solutions.
Je vous remercie, pardon.
Thank you. Pardon me, I was muted. So in this case, I will continue with my questions for the minister. March 4th, 2021, the ambassador for Canada in the U.S. had told this committee that as part of the Buy America provisions, the United States could add goods to the list. Currently, we've got iron, steel, and some manufactured goods on the list. Do we have information or even signals or signs, whether indirect or direct, that would indicate that the U.S. is considering changing some things on the list and adding things other than iron, steel, and manufactured goods? Well, to my knowledge, no, there's no indication now. That's not to say that there won't be in the future. And of course, we're going to keep a close eye on this in the event that that does happen. And then we will address those changes when the time comes. And of course, we would talk about our interests if that's something that occurs. So the United States, up until now, have not shown an extensive list or an exhaustive list of all goods that the Buy American provisions could apply to. Well, it's important to remember that it's only since January 20th that the new administration has been in place. And even if the president had provided executive orders with major announcements, well, there's a process that has to be followed, just as it does in Canada, and it has to go through Congress. So I think we're going to have to wait to get to that point and get any details in due time. And then Congress would get involved and might propose amendments. So even if the new administration wants to get things going. It's going to take some time before we get all the details. And for the time being, thank you. Thank you very much.
We'll go now for 2.5 minutes to Mr. Massey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Minister, the U.S. Center for Disease Control has issued a high travel warning to Canada from American citizens. And the point being that I have with regards to the order in council process is that it's secretive. It doesn't have to be inclusive to different groups and organizations. The tentacles for it might reach out for advice from different groups and organizations or bureaucrats, but why not a border task force that at least provides some public accountability and some innovative ideas on how to deal with this? Who would have thought that the US would be issuing a travel advisory against Canada to its citizens? But that's where we're at right now because of their advanced inoculation to or immunization to COVID right now. Why not have some type of a formal process like we've had in the past that would untangle border issues on a regular basis and proactively work on solutions and proposals? It's been very cruel for families waiting month by month for somebody somewhere to make a decision whether they can actually have a process to be reunited, let alone the business decisions and the business engagements that we have that are very particular regions like mold makers in my riding.
Thank you for the question. I certainly do not characterize the process as secretive. I think that certainly the stakeholders with whom we engage, we speak very openly with them. We are constantly being asked by the media where we position ourselves on issues related to the border. With respect to the CDC making decisions, they're a US body. They make those decisions as a function of the situation that exists within the United States. And we make our own decisions as well in Canada. And so far, there's been a mutual agreement as we renew on a monthly basis the border policies. It's not to say that at some point there wouldn't be some differences, but we are working not only listening to stakeholders, but we're also working with the United States so that as much as possible we can harmonize our border policy.
A quick question on auto, then I'll pivot to that. Similar to batteries is the sharing of information and data and privacy, especially when it comes to vehicles that are autonomous. What discussions are taking place with that? Again, this is part of a larger vision of auto. If we don't have those things, and also data management and data costs, autonomous vehicles and trucks will be compromised. What is happening with that, please?
Could you, I'm sorry, could you repeat your question? Just, I missed the part of it.
Yes, I'll be real quick, Mr. Chair. I'm just looking for a status of us in the United States sharing information related to privacy rights for the use of autonomous vehicles and trucks between Canada and the United States. For them to operate in both jurisdictions, we have to have comprehensive data and privacy management plans and also cost sharing with regards to those plans. Otherwise, they'll be compromised and won't be able to work. I'm just wondering if you can update what's going on with that, because we want to do the same things with batteries, but if we don't do that with data management in autonomous vehicles, they'll become useless on each point in the border.
Thank you very much for the question. So I'm going to put on my old transport hat, because that was very much something that I was engaged with the Secretary of Transport in the United States, where we harmonized with respect to regulations. And we were indeed talking about the whole concept of autonomous vehicles and the very critical issue of privacy rights because of the environment in which autonomous vehicles would be operating. So I can assure you that both Canada and the United States, when we talk about autonomous vehicles, we're not just talking about regulations with respect to how they operate, but because of the nature of autonomous vehicles, we're both very sensitive to privacy rights. And that is part of the discussion that my successor, Minister Alhabra, is currently engaged with Secretary Buttigieg.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. We'll go now to Mr. Hoback for 5 minutes, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And thank you, Minister, for being here this afternoon. Minister, you talked about the matrix, or you were asked about the matrix in regards to the border reopening, what that looks like, what are the things that have to check off. And I couldn't get your answer kind of made it sound like it was a political decision, not a science-based decision. So can you confirm to me that what goes on in regards to the decision around the opening of the border will be based on science, or is it a political decision?
It's first and foremost a scientific decision, and it's one that is based on
the science with respect to COVID-19.
Okay,
We have
okay.
to bear that
Fair
in
enough.
mind more than
Sorry, I don't mean
anything
to.
else. That's okay.
Yeah,
Fine.
I don't mean to be rude. We only get 5
No,
minutes.
no,
So
please.
you also touched about the process that you're using, similar to what we used under the USMCA or CUSMA negotiations. And actually, I was part of that. I worked very closely with Andrew Leslie in regards to that at that time, working across the line, across party lines to talk about the Canadian American advantage and how we work well together. The problem I see with that right now, first of all, you haven't assigned anybody to that role out of your caucus. Second of all, we can't travel. So part of that was face-to-face meetings. And we have a new Senate. In fact, a Senate that actually said no exceptions. If you look at that letter that 21 senators sent to the president, they didn't want to see any carve-outs, any exceptions. So how are we going to do that grunt work, that work that myself, Mr. Massey was part of it, Mr. Easter was part of it? How do you do that in light of the fact we can't travel there, we can't visit? And I'm very concerned when I start hearing from colleagues in the US that they don't even understand the problems. When we, for example, were dealing with Line 5, they didn't even realize that was an issue. So what's your strategy to make sure that work gets done?
So you raise an important point. When we look at essential travel, essential workers, we look at the question of whether the job that they do can be undertaken virtually as opposed to them having to be in situ. And sometimes that can be challenging, but sometimes, despite the fact that it's not as good as being there in place, it can be done virtually. The other factor, of course, is what are the safety risks associated with people, let's say, moving back and forth across the border.
That's not actually, I'm sorry, maybe you got me wrong. I'm not talking about the travel. I'm talking about the outreach that we did to have a successful conclusion to USMCA and how we had that Team Canada approach, and how you've got an atmosphere now where you can't do that. You just physically can't do that. So how do you take that reality and adjust your strategy to something new to reflect what you can or can't do? Because I haven't been part of any discussions in regards to a new strategy with regards to Buy America. I don't think Mr. Massey has. So, I kind of look at it as you've just kind of said, we've got a good friend now in the White House. We don't have Donald Trump. So we have, our buddy Biden, but buddies don't get you jobs, and buddies don't create opportunities, and buddies aren't relied on in the international context. So that's the only plot I'll leave it. But one other question I want to get before I lose out of time.
So let me answer. I mean, we are talking to each other. We're doing it virtually, but we are talking to each other.
But that was the problem. The ministers were talking to each other during CUSMA, but they were not getting a headway. It was the conversations that Andrew Leslie, Brian Massey, myself, Aaron O'Toole was down there. Those are the ones that were moving the yardsticks, and they never got credit for it. And the other question I wanted to ask you is, what other allies do you have in the fight on Buy America? So have you talked to our friends in the UK? Have you talked to Europe? Have you talked to Mexico? Have you created a nucleus of countries saying to the US that, hey, this is not just going to hurt Canada, it's actually going to hurt the global economy with this type of process? So what are you doing on the international scene to address Buy America?
So we are dealing with the United States because the Buy America policy as it affects us is the one that we are concerned with. And so we are working bilaterally with the United States by reaching out in a Team Canada approach to all the people that are influencers in the United States and that can help by understanding the strong link between our two countries that can help us to make the points that we want to make sure that there isn't undue protectionism between the two countries.
But wouldn't it be helpful? We have very few ammunition, for lack of a better word, as Canada by itself. Wouldn't we be stronger if we had more of a front, international front, with let's say the UK or France, who are going to have similar issues with Buy America as we are? So why wouldn't we get together with them and actually put on a stronger face in that type of light?
Well, because
well,
yes, I mean, Canada and the United States have the largest two-way trade in the world. 75% of what we export goes roughly to the United States. So as a result of that, this is an issue that we regard as one between Canada and the United States. And thank you for your help during CUSMA. If I have not acknowledged it, thank you for your efforts during that time. But I think it was extremely successful, our negotiations on CUSMA, and I think we came into the right place. We intend to continue to do that as we move forward. And may I, Mr. Chair, not correct, but sort of fine tune something I said to
Monsieur Savard. Il m'a posé la question.
He asked me the question.
Just a second, can I wait till my time's over and then?
Yeah, sorry,
finish?
right after that. Right after that.
Mr. Hoback, your time is up, actually.
Oh, it can't be up. Yeah, no.
I give you extra, as I always do.
May I take a minute, Mr. Chair?
Mr. Minister, if you want a very short, please.
Yeah.
Sure.
Oui, Monsieur Savard.
Yes, Mr. Savard asked a question. He asked about the list of goods for Buy America provisions. Yes, it's true. President Biden said that he intended to do so, but in answering your question, well, what I want to say is that we don't have the details. We don't know exactly what he's talking about and how much he'll expand it. And so for that, we'll have to wait a little longer. But it's true that he did say it, and that's not a secret.
Thank you. And for the final last round, we'll go for the final last question. We'll go to Mr. Sarai for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister. Minister, one of the, and you've heard this from some of the colleagues across the aisle as well, one of the successes of the CUSMA negotiations was there was a bipartisan, multi-partisan, all-Canadian approach. And one of the things that, and I was part of the Canada-US Interparl that went and visited many congressmen and congresswomen and governors and senators and et cetera to emphasize the amount of trade they had, where Canada was usually the largest trading bloc for most states in the US, or if not the second most largest trading bloc. In the same light, when it comes to procurement, and I've asked this before, so I'm not expecting an actual dollar figure, but would it not be very important that we emphasize two American states, congressional districts, and senators and otherwise, of how much procurement Canadian companies do in the US, but also vice versa, how many American companies do procurement in Canada, that, you know, if they put Buy America provisions on Canadian goods, if Canada was to do the same, how much would be put at risk? Has that been emphasized to them? As GAC officials been able to collect that data? And if you can perhaps let us know what you've been doing in order to get that message across to them.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for your work. It was really an enormous outreach involving a lot of players south of the border, passing those messages. And yes, I can remember when I was doing my part, receiving sheets from GAC, from the trade side, that specifically in detail talked about how much trade was with that state, what products, how much they imported from Canada, and how much they exported to Canada. So both sides of the ledger were provided, and that's the kind of information we were able to share with American lawmakers, with governors, with people in Washington, so that they realized it. And most of the time, many of them admitted not realizing just to what extent their linkages to Canada were extensive. So yes, you present both sides so that they realize that not only is it important for them to be able to import certain products that they want from Canada, but how much their economy at the state level depends on being able to export to Canada as well.
And in the past, with speaking to your officials and trade officials, we've learned that really and I think it was Mr. Verrill who's here, had said it wasn't really a direct reaction to Canada, that this Buy America is more of a reaction to other countries, particularly probably China and others who they may deem as dumping or flooding their market with cheaper procurement options, and they want to emphasize the United States made products. Can you also clarify in your conversations with your counterparts in the U.S. that this provision is not intended to target Canadian goods, that it has intentions to protect against others, or if that is the case, or if not the case, and are they open to the idea of working with Canada to get an exemption for our procurement goods?
I think thank you for the question. I think it was not intended that I'm going to interpret things here, but I don't believe that the United States Buy America policy was intended to be aimed at a particular country. I think it was a policy that they decided the new administration to put in place. Having said that, as I said, the very first encounter between our Prime Minister and the President, the subject was discussed, and it's been discussed several times since then. And there is a realization in the United States that they would not want to, through their policy, have unintended consequences because of the high level of integration between in our supply chains between the two countries. So they are open to listening to us if we believe that something is having an unintended consequence. That is, in my opinion, a very positive position on their part, and it shows that they're sensitive to the importance of maintaining strong integrated supply chains between our two countries.
Thank you, Mr. Sarai. This portion of the meeting is now coming to an end. Thank you, Minister, again for taking the time. Thank you, Mr. Verul, also. It's always good to see you, and thank you, Mr. Grant, for taking the time also to enlighten this committee. So we will suspend for a few minutes just to onboard the next panel. Thank you again.
Thank you.
In our second panel discussion, with us today is Mr. William Reinsch, School Chair and Senior Advisor, Center for Strategic and International Studies. We also have here from the Canadian Center for Policy Alternatives, Mr. Stuart True, who's a senior researcher. And we're also hoping once he's able to log on from the Canadian Global Affairs Institute, Mr. Colin Robertson, Vice President and Fellow. So Mr. Reinsch, we will open the floor up to you. I believe you have an opening statement. You can have the floor for 5 minutes. Please go ahead.
I do. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. It's an honor to appear before this committee. I am testifying in my personal capacity and expressing my own views. The United States is currently entering a stage when Buy American is likely to play a greater role in federal government policy. And I do not see immediate relief for those who oppose that for 3 reasons. First is politics. Buy American has always been a popular slogan. And in last year's election, both our parties supported strong domestic procurement provisions. The voters the two parties are competing for, largely white blue-collar workers in traditional manufacturing sectors, believe Buy American is an important policy that will create jobs for them. And President Biden seems determined to recapture as many of those voters as he can. Pursuing a more aggressive policy than President Trump did will be part of that effort. The second reason is the COVID-19 pandemic, which has brought to light gaps in our supply chains that led to shortages of critical personal protective equipment, among other things. Many of them were short-term and ultimately resolved through market adjustments. But U.S. citizens were left with the realization that we did not have everything we wanted at the moment we needed it, and the government wants to make sure that does not happen again. My understanding is that Canada is experiencing similar problems right now. In starting that process, the administration, to its credit, has not proposed autarky and has acknowledged that working with our allies and partners is the best way forward. The extent to which that is lip service remains to be seen. The result of the pandemic has been to refocus supply chain management on resiliency and redundancy. Managers need not only Plan A, but Plan B and Plan C as well. And all those alternatives will involve more domestic sourcing or nearshoring. They will also involve some movement away from just-in-time manufacturing to rebuilding inventories. The third reason is related to national security and grows out of our deteriorating relationship with China. In the last 10 years, there has been a significant change in public opinion in the United States about China. In 2011, 51% of those polled had a favorable view of China and 36% a negative view. In 2020, those numbers were more than reversed, 22% favorable and 73% unfavorable. This change has been echoed in the US Congress, where elected officials of both parties have pronounced China a security threat and vie to see who can take the hardest line against it. The debate has moved in two directions: running faster, improving our innovation capabilities in critical technologies to better compete with China, and slowing China down by restricting its access to US technology. Both strategies have involved efforts to reorient supply chains away from China, sometimes by banning the use of Chinese equipment in the United States, as in the case of Huawei, and sometimes by encouraging companies to decouple from China and return manufacturing onshore. At the same time, US companies have been shortening their supply chains for reasons unrelated to US government policy, in response to political uncertainties in some countries, rising wages, or a desire to reduce transportation times and to be closer to their customers. The sharp economic downturn in the spring of 2020 due to COVID accelerated that trend. All these factors have combined to push companies to restructure their supply chains in ways that favor domestic production. In addition, it appears the government will attempt to change its procurement rules further to favor domestic production. That will be a complicated undertaking, in part because 96% of federal procurement is already domestic. That number is a bit misleading because we treat some parts and components incorporated into a product as domestic, even if they are imported. Changing that methodology will force some manufacturers to adjust their supply chains to include more US content. Federal procurement contracts for goods in fiscal year 2019 amounted to $231.4 billion in spending, a relatively small amount compared to the size of the US economy. The larger economic impact is likely to occur with respect to supply chain adjustments that US companies make either on their own or as a result of government pressure. There, the key issue will be how we define national security. There were officials in the Trump administration who defined it very broadly, and a glance at President Biden's supply chain executive order shows similar breadth. He has ordered urgent studies on 4 critical sectors: semiconductor manufacturing and packaging, batteries, critical minerals, and pharmaceuticals. But he has also ordered year-long studies of major sectors of the economy: the defense industrial base, public health, information and communications technology, energy, transportation, and agriculture. Taken together, these sectors amount to nearly 60% of US GDP. If all the studies recommend actions to reorient supply chains to the domestic economy, the administration's policy will have a significant impact. Finally, as an American, it is not my place to suggest what your government might do with respect to US policy, but nevertheless, I'll make some suggestions. First, the premise of NAFTA was to further integrate the 3 North American economies, and I believe it succeeded. Economic integration on our continent, particularly between Canada and the United States, is inevitable, and it would be useful for your government to continue to remind ours of that imperative from time to time. Instead of buy American, we should be buying North American. Second, since our security interests are closely aligned, we both benefit from close defense cooperation, Canada could also work with the United States in developing a definition of national security that does not overreach and sweep into the domestic procurement pot a lot of things that shouldn't be there. Third, the Canadian government could remind the United States of its obligations under the WTO Government Procurement Agreement and of its obligation to provide compensation if it limits other nations' benefits. Mr. Chair, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to take questions later on.
Thank you very much, Mr. Reinsch. And now, Mr. True, you have the floor for 5 minutes, please.
Hey, thanks very much to the chair and to the committee for this chance to speak to you about the Biden administration's plan to tighten up the Buy American and Buy America rules. A bit about me, I currently direct the Trade and Investment Research Project at the CCPA, which has been doing public interest research into Canadian trade and investment policy since the late 1990s. Now I've split this presentation up today into three parts. The first gives some context on the Buy American policies themselves. The second is on, I think, how we shouldn't respond. And the third is on how I think we should respond to this moment. The first point, Buy America is here to stay. As committee members know and have heard from other witnesses, Buy American, and other domestic preferences on U.S. procurement have existed for some time, and then they enjoy broad bipartisan support. Buy American policies require federal agencies to favor domestic end products or domestic construction materials when procuring goods, except in situations where it would be impractical or overly expensive to do so. For example, if buying locally would be more than 25% more expensive than the lowest qualifying foreign bid, or where there's no domestic supplier, the agency can waive the Buy American requirement at the federal level. Buy America, in contrast, or not in contrast, but the state level element of it, these policies refer to a slate of domestic content statutes and regulations in which federal funding for state and local governments, mainly for transit and highway projects, but also water infrastructure, comes with domestic content quotas. So these quotas generally relate to the use of American iron and steel, certain other manufactured goods, or they could apply again to the value of components in things like buses and rail cars for public transit projects. So as the committee has heard, while many Buy American measures at the federal level in the US are generally waived by regulation, not by statute, for Canada and other member countries to the WTO Agreement on Government Procurement, Buy America transfers to the lower levels of government are completely excluded from the US GPA coverage, even for the 37 states that have made other procurement commitments in that agreement. The long-standing measures are standard operating procedure in the US, no matter who's in office, and the US is well within its legal rights to continue them. We have very little leverage, in other words, to change these policies. I think the main unknowns, as this committee has already heard, is what exactly are the Buy America conditions that will apply in this specific new stimulus plan, and how does he plan on changing or tightening up these waiver application process to make sure, in response, I should say, to criticism that the Buy America contracts have been going to foreign firms. I think we have to put in there that mainly the focus seems to be on China with respect to this specific aspect of the Buy America contracts. So how should we not respond? I think looking back at the Obama administration days when they passed their own Recovery Act a decade ago with strings attached, Buy America strings, we tried to negotiate a bilateral procurement agreement that would be balanced, and it didn't go well. The end deal announced in 2010 was hugely lopsided in favor of the US. Canada largely opened up provincial and local government procurement to unconditional US bids in return for a tiny sliver of opportunity to bid on stimulus money in a handful of federal projects. So this wasn't guaranteed access, obviously. It was an opportunity to bid on what was left of the money that had already been spent. It amounted to about $4 to $5 billion worth of what was initially a $275 billion US procurement fund. So not a great deal at the end of the day. Canada has since made permanent commitments in the WTO GPA to restrict provincial procurement flexibility and bilateral commitments with the EU to permanently cover municipal procurement. US firms with presence in Canada benefit from both of these agreements already. And as a result, we have very little to offer the Americans in a new procurement deal. You could offer them the CETA Plus arrangement with municipal coverage, but that's exactly what we did in the CUSMA negotiations, and they weren't interested. And I suspect the Biden administration wouldn't be interested now. So instead of fretting over, instead of a new deal or fretting over what Canadian products or components may or may not be excluded from Biden's new Buy America plans, I think we should recognize that these same products and components, as this committee's already heard from other witnesses, steel pipes, concrete, rail cars, buses, they're needed here in Canada as well for the same purposes, right? Transit, renewable power, broadband access, infrastructure, water in particular. The AFP at the CCPA recommends we spend $36 billion over the next 8 years on new water infrastructure because we have a huge deficit in that area. And if we're going to spend the money, which I think we should, why not take a page out of the Biden's playbook and find ways to channel some of that money to domestic manufacturing, local small and medium-sized enterprises, women-owned businesses, Indigenous-owned businesses, etc., with all the spillover benefits that would produce in Canada and the US. So in summary, I would say sustainability criteria on federal transfers to the provinces and territories that prioritize high-quality, sustainable Canadian goods and services may even bring the Biden administration to the table to discuss, as we just heard from the previous witness, a potentially beneficial, mutually beneficial North American green jobs and procurement strategy. So also happy to answer questions, and thanks very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. True. We're still trying to get Mr. Robertson hooked online. So what we may do is we'll start with questions. And if he does get a chance to come online, we'll just revert back to him. So for the first 6 minutes, we'll go to Mr. Straw, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm having some connection issues myself here in Chilliwack today, so bear with me, please. My questions are for Mr. Reinsch. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I think there, certainly at the Government of Canada level, there was almost a celebratory mood when there was a change in administration. We figured that there would be a return to certainly a more predictable diplomacy, et cetera. And I think a lot of Canadians perhaps thought that a lot of the protectionist type of tendencies of the Trump administration would be immediately rolled back, and we get back to the good old friends who singing together and cranking out deals to the benefit of both countries. Do you see, you kind of alluded to it, it's been my observation that so far we have made very few, if any, gains in terms of our relationship with the new administration in terms of policy initiatives that would benefit Canada. We've seen the cancellation of the Keystone XL pipeline. We have another pipeline with Line 5 in Michigan under threat. We have no movement on softwood lumber agreement that has not been signed. And now we have this Buy America issue. Do you see any change other than perhaps a friendlier and more predictable president? Do you see any change from the Trump administration's protectionist measures with the Biden administration vis-a-vis its relationship with Canada, or are we just in for more of the same over the next 4 years?
I think the answer would be not yet, but I wouldn't lose hope because I think it's too soon to say where they'll come out on a number of these issues. Most of these things are under review. I can't speak to Keystone. That was not an issue that we've done any work on. I'm a trade person. With respect to the other issues, I think the equivalent of your trade minister, Ambassador Tai, only took office 3 weeks ago. Issues like lumber are things that are under review, and I can't tell you that they're going to be the same as they were before. I think there's, as you've noted, there's obviously a difference in tone and a difference in rhetoric. There is a philosophical difference as well that I think will come out. President Biden is a multilateralist in every sense of the word. He believes in cooperation. He believes in teamwork. President Trump was a unilateralist who believed in American sovereignty and was not interested in institutions or cooperation. And that leads also to the view that Biden looks at relationships holistically. So he looks, Canada is not just about trade. It's about a whole range of issues, some of which you've discussed today. I think that works to the benefit of the relationship and the benefit of the things that we're talking about in the long term. I cannot, however, say, in the first, almost 3 months of tenure that they've, taken a bunch of actions that should make you happy. They have not. And I think with respect to domestic procurement in particular, they're unlikely to do so. When they produced their policy, someone asked them, what's the difference between you and Trump? And the answer was essentially, well, his didn't work and ours will.
Right.
So I'm not sure that's a good sign.
You mentioned a number of issues there. We talked about the political reasons already. I think the 2-year election cycle that the U.S. has makes it very difficult to do difficult things and have have some time pass before someone's always in a midterm or a congressional race or something makes it's all very short term in terms of negotiating or proposing things on international trade. But I think there is some common ground here in what you're proposing. I think Canadians have recognized gaps in our own supply chains, our own manufacturing capability, et cetera. So I want to go to the China relationship. Is there an opportunity for Canada to be a part of a new international alliance, perhaps, that is no longer reliant? I know President Biden has gone down that road, but are we really going to all have to go down this road separately, or can we find a way to do this in a unified way where nations with common cause and common values can perhaps create their own integrated supply chains and not all be looking out for our own just the national interest? Why do we need to create all of this separately? Can we not do it in an integrated way, especially between Canada and the US?
I think his intention is clearly that. It's clearly to develop a coalition and a common approach toward China, and Canada would be an integral part of that. My understanding of their views on China is they intend to take the next year essentially building the kind of coalition that you're talking about. And we are not, at least at CSIS, looking for major changes in our China trade policy in the interim. I don't think things that are in place will go away, but I don't think there will be new things arriving. I think they intend to work with our allies first to see if we can get everybody on the same page and then try to tackle the problem collectively.
And my final question is about the tax that has been proposed by the Biden administration on, I guess, worldwide U.S. corporate income as part of his infrastructure plan. Do you think that will that have the same impact as Buy America, or is it's a separate tool? Obviously, it's could you speak briefly about what you feel that the impact will be on maybe reshoring U.S. manufacturing using the tax system?
You're not referring to the proposal he just made to the OECD. You're referring to the proposal in his legislation.
Yeah, that was part of his multi-trillion-dollar infrastructure announcement.
Yes, a good question. I think it's a little bit too soon to say, partly because, as you know, if those of you that work with tax legislation know, the devil's in the details, and there is no legislation yet. There's only a concept, so it's a little bit hard to say. I think the intent the effect would fall largely on American multinational companies that have already offshored their production. I think in the end might be incentives for them to reshore, to come back here. I don't see a large impact on non-American multinationals. One of the criticisms of his proposal, which I've not analyzed myself, is that it may have the effect of encouraging inversions, corporate inversions, which is what President Trump's tax bill attempted to stop and actually did stop fairly effectively. It had other negative effects, but it stopped inversions, and there's some feeling that the Biden proposal may be a step backwards in that respect. I don't see a major impact on non-U.S. multinational companies, though.
Thank you, Mr. Strahl. Welcome, Mr. Robertson. Are you able to hear us? You're muted. We can give you some time if you want to. You want to take some time?
No, I think, is that better?
It's better. Do you have a headset by any chance?
Unfortunately, we had to switch. I've spent the last hour trying to get in, and I'm on my iPad, and the connection for the headset doesn't work. Although I could use.
It just makes it easier for the interpretation.
Yeah, I'm just going to see if this will work.
Why don't we suspend for a few moments, just to give Mr. Robertson the chance. I understand you have opening comments. We'll give you 5 minutes to make your comments, please.
Okay, thank you. My experience with Buy America began in Albany in 1981 when my then boss, Consul General Ken Taylor, we traveled to New York City to Albany to meet with then Governor Hugh Carey to push back on Buy New York policies on steel and cement, an experience that over the years I would repeat in different states and on Capitol Hill. Protectionism through preferential procurement policies for goods and services is not particular to the United States. They are practiced by all nations, including Canada, and at every level of government. If all politics is local, so is trade. Voters prefer that their tax dollars be spent locally, even though buying local generally costs more and provides less choice. But these are economist arguments. They don't matter much to the public. Neither does the belief that Canada deserves an exemption from Buy America because we are America's friend and neighbor. While polls consistently show that Americans like Canada more than any other nation, in fact, more than we like them, the business of America is business. So we've learned to deal with Buy America policies on four levels. First, by negotiating a procurement agreement within our trade agreements, like with defense production sharing. At the Trump administration's insistence, there is no procurement chapter in the current Canada-US-Mexico agreement, yet much of what was included in the NAFTA is included in the WTO plurilateral agreement on government procurement. But there are more likely to be deletions from the entities list in this agreement, given the current protectionist mood on both sides of the aisle in Congress and the Made in America approach of the Biden administration. Second, offer reciprocity in procurement at the state and province level, because that is where the money is spent. This is how we dealt with President Obama's Recovery Act program in the wake of the 2008-9 recession. Prime Minister Harper turned to the Premier's Council of the Federation. Premier Jean Charest and his successor as chair, Premier Brad Wall, reached out to their governor counterparts, including a trip by 7 premiers to the National Governors Association in February 2010 to make the case for reciprocity. The arguments that the premiers made then still apply. By opening to outside vendors, local cartels' ability to game the market was curtailed. Competition means better value. Most states are constitutionally prevented from running deficits. Governors need to make their dollars count, especially as they face huge costs in public services because of the pandemic. The 2010 Procurement Reciprocity Agreement did not include every state nor cover every sector, but it did open procurement opportunities for Canada. Third, working with labor is vital. When our unions are part of the negotiations, as we saw during the CUSMA negotiations, we make progress. The United Steelworkers lead the charge for Buy America, but their membership is both Canadian and American. In the early 90s, we gained respite from Buy America on steel because then Trade Minister Michael Wilson went to Washington with then Canadian Steelworkers National Director and later Steelworkers President Leo Gerard. And after talks with Steelworkers President then Lynn Williams, the administration agreed that Buy America would not apply. Fourth, with those Americans we buy from and sell to, we need to make permanent our campaign that making things together is mutually profitable for jobs and prosperity. Look at our mutually profitable integrated auto trade. Before a car is assembled, its parts have crisscrossed the border at least 6 times. A car assembled in Canada contains 60% American-made parts, often from Canadian manufacturers with new operations like Magna, Martin Ray, or Linamar. We need to underline that our regulatory standards, especially labor and environmental, are commensurate with those of the United States. We also need to avoid the tyranny of small differences that keeps us out of the US market. Given America's growing national security concerns about reliable supply and resiliency, we need to point out that we are their closest ally and the source of their energy independence, including the critical minerals required for next generation manufacturing. When it becomes an American issue with Americans who want to preserve their supply chains, we increase our success rate, as we witnessed with the renewal of the Trump tariffs, with the dismissal of the Trump tariffs on steel and aluminum. To conclude, there is no magic bullet for Buy America. Hoping for an exemption because we are Canadian won't work. We need to make our case around reciprocity and better value while underlining the security of our mutual beneficial supply chains. Buy America is not going away, so making our case must be a permanent campaign, a Team Canada effort involving the Prime Minister and Premiers, cabinets and legislators working with business and labor. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Robertson. We'll now go to Mr. Oliphant for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you to all the witnesses. And I just want to begin from the last panel that Mr. Hoback mentioned the important role of parliamentarians in the negotiation of the new NAFTA deal. And I want to echo that. Even as the chair of the Public Safety Committee, I led a delegation and very much chose the Conservative Vice Chair, Tony Clement at the time, to co-chair every meeting that we were in as we met legislators in the United States, because he had much more experience than I did. And the two of us were able to do that. And I think, as Mr. Hoback was mentioning, and Matthew, what was Matthew's name, Brian? Not Dubois. Anyway.
Yeah, we had a couple Matthews. So
anyway, Matthew
okay.
from the NDP, who's a good friend and was a very successful thing.
Bipartisan, very very kind of you, Rob.
What we were doing in that time, I think,
Dubé.
And I wouldn't
Matthew Dubé. Sorry.
Matthew Dubé. Sorry, yes. Don't tell him I forgot. I would take exception with Mr. True's absolutely sort of nihilistic view of Mr. Harper's attempt with the Obama situation in his Buy America program. It wasn't a good solution, but I'm not sure it was as horrible as some of the labor unions suggested. But I think our approach with the new NAFTA was much better because it was much less partisan. It involved labor unions. It involved senior leadership from the Conservative Party, the NDP. It involved business. It involved premiers. And I think, obviously, I'm just going to start out by saying that needs to be our approach this time. We need to have a broad-based approach. I'm appreciating that it's not going away. I think Mr. Robertson was very right. This is something here to stay. I think all the witnesses have said that. So now I'm looking at if it's here to stay and we need an all-party approach and a multi-level approach, what are our levers? I was astounded when I spoke to American legislators at the lack of information and knowledge they had about their dependence on the Canadian economy and Canadian supply chain. I was astounded that they didn't know about the integration of our manufacturing sectors. I was astounded that they didn't know the dependence that the United States had on certain, not only our natural resources, but other sectors. Information has got to be part of it. Leverage, though, and I would like all the witnesses we have to comment on what levers do they think we as a Canadian government, a Canadian parliament, can bring to bear, knowing that we start out with the position that a strong American economy and a strong Canadian economy are not mutually exclusive, they're interdependent. So open it up maybe to the order you spoke in. Mr. Reinsch first.
Thank you very much, Mr. Oliphant. Let me begin by saying that having worked in Congress for 20 years and then served in the Clinton administration and then in the private sector, I've seen this issue from multiple angles. And I can tell you with confidence that your government, regardless of which party is in power at the moment, and your embassy has over the years done an absolutely superb job of providing the United States Congress with exactly the information you're talking about. That doesn't mean that they pay any attention to it or that they read it, but your government has been diligent in developing the information that demonstrates the linkages that you're talking about. And I guess my first point would be to say, keep on doing that, because one of the things that I think one learns in politics is that repetition is an important element. You have to keep saying the same thing over and over again. And with our Congress people, I think it's important to do that. I think also to do it in the way that you referred to in your remarks, to do it personally, which of course is more difficult now, but won't be forever, to do it personally in direct contact with legislative colleagues in the Congress is very, very effective. Forming relationships, forming personal relationships, forming cross-border relationships is also effective. The information is there. The information is available. I mean, these are teachable moments, but we also have to have learners, and sometimes you have to just keep pounding it in over and over again. Wish I had something more brilliant, but I don't.
Give Mr. True a chance.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Oliphant, for the question. I'm not sure I would say our assessment of the first Buy America deal was nihilistic. I think it was not quite the right word. But in terms of the leverage we have now with the Biden administration, I mean, I would say we should be working with them where we can. And so where we see Biden saying he wants to reform these procurement rules at the WTO, for example, to make it easier for all governments to use public spending in these ways to support domestic priorities, for example, whether it's renewal in the case of this post-COVID recovery, whether it's job creation, those kinds of things. That's an area where we could work with the Biden administration to reform the trade agenda, as we kind of did under the Trump administration with respect to investor-state dispute settlement, where we've kind of started to come up with a new thinking around ISDS that maybe we don't need to be included in these agreements. Maybe the harms to Canadian, the threats to Canadian environmental policy and other measures, as Minister Freeland mentioned when we signed the deal, saying it's thank God we got rid of ISDS. Now we can actually have more flexibility around these policies. So, I mean, I would encourage us to work with the Biden administration on these interesting areas where we can put these things like sustainable development and trade into a better balance than perhaps they are now.
Thank you, Mr. Oliphant. I'm sorry, we're over time. We will now go to Monsieur Savard Tremblay. Vous avez 6 minutes, s'il vous plaît.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you. Greetings to all the witnesses. Thank you for being here and for your testimonies today. Mr. True, I was listening very carefully to what you said, and I also read your text, which is very interesting. I like when ideas are a little bit outside of the box. I appreciate the ideas that you propose and going more towards environmental partnerships. And you described this cycle where we cry foul for protectionism, but there's no point because we just end up filing complaints, and then the cycle just continues. I'd like to ask you. You proposed some things, and I'd like to know in more concrete terms, what would you do? You talked about a Buy America and a Buy American and how that would apply to Canada, with the idea of coming to Buy a North American approach with the U.S. Can you talk to us about that in a little more detail?
I actually, we talked about the steelworkers recently. The steelworkers have done some good work on this through Blue Green Canada. They have a proposal for sustainable purchasing at multiple levels of government, and it would factor in things like the carbon emissions of Canadian cement versus international cement or steel or aluminum. As the committee has heard, we have some of the cleanest aluminum and steel in the world, and so applying those kinds of criteria would in effect favor local production, local jobs, local workers, without running afoul of our trade obligations, which, as I think currently prohibit those kinds of clauses. So that's one angle that I think we could think about in terms of sustainability criteria versus explicit buy local, buy Canadian criteria, which are prohibited under a lot of Canadian trade deals.
Je vous remercie.
Thank you for your answer. You also talked about enhancing partnerships, environmental partnerships. So this would be a procurement market. So both countries would open up their procurement markets on, for example, renewable energy. So public contracts that would be connected to renewable energy, and then businesses would be on equal footing. That being said, we would each want to favor our production, even if the renewable energy market is very interesting for the environment. Isn't there a risk of falling into something like the lowest bidder?
Yeah, on things like renewable power, I think I heard Mr. Verhoeven propose that this was an area where we might be able to get some kind of sectoral arrangement with the United States. So rather than a full-on waiver for everything, which is probably unlikely outside of the Buy American policies, which in many cases where we would have a waiver, thinking about how do we negotiate something with the Biden administration in a sector like that. I don't think in this environment where certain of these trade rules that were once considered strict and unmovable are now all of a sudden, I think, quite movable when we've seen where the Biden administration is going. I wouldn't rule out ideas like production sharing, like maybe an auto pack type arrangement where we can agree to share the production of these things that we know we need to build quickly and roll out in order to decarbonize our economy and get people working. So anyway, just another idea in terms of the different ways we can think of climate, jobs, and trade policy now.
Indeed. Sorry for the noise. This approach would definitely merit some further study. You also talked about good regulatory practices. We had raised this with others during CUSMA when it first was put on the table. Do you think that we should seek some kind of waiver for this aspect of CUSMA in the case of bilateral discussions between both countries, for example?
I think if I understand your question with respect to the good regulatory practices chapter of the USMCA or the CUSMA, I suppose we'll have to see how that chapter works out in the end. There have been concerns raised by some U.S. business around Canada's plastics management plan, how this might violate that chapter. Whether they pursue that, if they end up pursuing that, then maybe we do have to think about some kind of official, as you say, some kind of official waiver from, the chapter itself, because that seems like a pretty excessive use of the chapter to challenge something like, a government's plan to reduce the single-use plastics in the environment. But I don't have any specific, haven't thought about it too much, but it's an interesting question.
Well, in the very least, we'll have to study that further. I'm being told that my time is up.
And for this next 6 minutes, we'll go to Mr. Massey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for our witnesses to be here. And just a general question with regards to everyone right now. And what I was trying to get at in the previous witnesses, and Mr. Oliphant raised it, what his delegation did helps my riding for Windsor West, where I'm on the border here with 40% of our trade, all kinds of different culture, social issues. And what I was trying to get to the last panel was that right now we don't have a border task force that includes, the private sector, unions, civil society, and so forth to work on our border policies. Sometimes they get entangled and some are outdated, some need tweaking and so forth. And with COVID, it's even more complicated. And the point being is that, the cabinet and the order in council is very secretive. There's no minutes. There's no provision for the public to have full access to documents and to see what's going on and what's being put on the table, what's not. I don't think that's a helpful process right now. And so my question is, and a good example is that Mr. Sarai and I have been in the United States lobbying. Mr. McKay and I have been to so many meetings over the years, and Mr. Hoback and I as well too covered tons of ground in Washington, opening up doors and creating conversations the government wouldn't even have access to because they just don't have either the people there or they don't have the diversity because they don't represent all of Canada. They represent the political party in power at the time. So my question is general, maybe starting with Mr. True and going across the board here. Would it not make sense to have some type of a working group or working model that actually had some type of accountability and openness to the public? I have so many concerned citizens that I can't see their relatives or families, and they have no idea other than month by month what to go by. They're not asking for things to be unsafe. And then we have issues like our mold makers who are very particular industry that are left behind. And then we have a whole series of other types of measures in place that could actually require some tweaking that could build stronger economic ties more efficiently. So, Mr. True, to you, and don't, if you think it's a bad idea, say it. I don't mind. It's not going to hurt my feelings.
It sounds like a good idea to me, and you're the expert on this, Mr. Haas. I would add, like I think you mentioned them, but municipal governments to that mix as well, because especially when we're talking about procurement, this is an area where we saw during the CETA negotiations, for example, that there was widespread opposition among municipalities to being included in that agreement and permanently bound to those GPA rules now on government procurement. So make sure they're in there, and that could be quite exciting. I think it's a good idea.
It's a great suggestion. Anybody else?
Yes, I don't want to tell you it's a bad idea, but I won't tell you it's a good idea either. Over the years, I confess I've become cynical about structural solutions. I think structures are things you create when you don't know what else to do, and they don't necessarily solve the problem. They just create another forum to discuss solving the problem. On the other hand, if you believe that there's not insufficient transparency on border issues, then the solution you're talking about would have a favorable impact on creating more transparency. Second, if you believe that your concerns are not being adequately attended to in Washington, nobody's paying attention, you can't get the attention of relevant authorities, then creating a special structure would probably address that as well. You're a better judge than I am of whether those two needs need to be met.
And that's a fair criticism about that. I appreciate that. One of the things I liked about our former auto policies, we used to measure results and actually have measurement criteria specific for that every year as well. We had that. So it's a very good advice. Mr. Robertson?
Yeah, I think that, we've had along the trade screen when we cross the border. After 9/11, we added a security screen. We're now going to add a health screen. I think we need to look at border crossings regionally. There's very good work being done by the Pacific Northwest Economic Region out there, pilots as to how to make the border work better. There's something at the Wilson Center going on. I think ultimately it's going to be the Prime Minister and the Premiers at their Thursday night conversations that'll make the decisions on where we go. But I do think it's an opportunity for us to also think about how we reimagine this border given post-COVID. So I think yes, we should be looking at this, and we shouldn't be bound by one size fits all. I think there may be a variety of things we can try, opening it in certain parts of the, because we have a massive border. It's not just the 49th parallel, it's also the border between Yukon and Alaska. So yes, I would agree with your approach.
And one of the strengths that we've had is that even though we may not have the final decision, as members of the Canada-US Parliamentary Association, we're chirping at people all the time, and they're chirping back at their people all through the system, and they're hearing it from several ways and getting issues you'd never think of before. I want to quickly move to Mr. True, because you had mentioned with regards to almost a domestic procurement policy, and that's actually something that I got advice from a U.S. former congressman. He's passed away, Mr. Obastar, long representing Transport Committee person as well too, and he's a very, very good person in many respects. He was part of our Canada-US, and he mentioned to me that we should consider a Buy Canada policy as part of a negotiation tactic to push back a bit on some of these things that might be more, seem real, almost to the point they're silly between ourselves, like digging up pipes and infrastructure and so forth. Is that what you're kind of suggesting a little bit? Is that element? And then I'll segue with there real quickly to why I think it might lead to, actually, when I talked about the microchip issue, is to partner on that where we are domestically bound to China's production. And this is for a microchip that's necessary for a PlayStation, to all that, to a minivan, to a toaster. I mean, this is the thing that we've put our vulnerability. Is that the kind of the goal of maybe a domestic procurement that also could lead and open up dialogue to creating maybe some co-production for North America?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. So a Buy Canadian policy is probably out of the question at this point, given the commitments we've made recently in the CETA and other agreements. But as we've been proposing, and others unions have been proposing, I mean, there can be sustainability criteria attached to public spending that would have similar effects. You can also think of perhaps Canada building on its global leadership on gender-friendly trade, right? Gender-based trade, where we look at how do we bring more women-owned businesses into procurement opportunities within Canada, right? I mean, that could be something that we could have something similar to a trade commissioner service, for example, but domestically to help small and medium-sized enterprises, women-owned businesses, Indigenous-owned businesses, help them to find the procurement opportunities that are available across Canada, right? So the effect is you're helping these companies get into those opportunities, but you're not doing it with a strict Buy Canadian. I agree that I think the Buy Sustainable policy that had the same effect would potentially bring the Biden administration to the table because it might have the effect of excluding certain American companies. But anyway.
And some of that actually, their infrastructure projects over here, like we're building the Gordie Howe Bridge, something I've been after in 1997. At any rate, the U.S. actually has provisions to allow for access to minorities, women, and others that are disenfranchised historically through the economic system that actually get a portion or cut out or carve out. So I guess you're saying the same type of thing in some respects, and that wouldn't violate our policies because they're already doing it there.
It wouldn't strictly. I mean, we didn't seek within the GPA, the WTO, a carve out for those policies like the US has. We don't have a carve out for set asides for minority owned businesses or women owned businesses. I don't see that as a reason not to pursue them. I don't think, we shouldn't be avoiding risks like that, right? For good policy.
Thank you, Mr. Massey. Colleagues, it looks like we have 5 minutes left, so I don't think we'll have a chance to go into the second round. So I will.
No.
No, I'm sorry. Just it's 4:55 now. It wouldn't be fair to everybody. Wouldn't know the time. So why don't I thank the witnesses on behalf of the committee? Thank you to Mr. Reinsch. Thank you to Mr. Reinsch. Thank you to Mr. True, and thank you to Mr. Robertson for your comments today and sort of helping us sort of discover more about this policy that the United States is thinking of enacting. So thank you very much on behalf of the committee. Really appreciate your comments. Thank you to the committee, and hope you have a great weekend. Bye-bye.